Today in the Toretsk direction, amidst intense floor-by-floor fighting in Toretsk's high-rises, a Russian soldier fell to his death from the 6th floor while attempting to escape via balconies. Russian plans to swiftly advance through Toretsk in Donetsk Oblast and divide the city have been thwarted by unexpectedly strong Ukrainian resistance. Here, Russian forces attempted to advance from two assault vectors, the northern flank of the city and the city center. In response, Ukrainian forces launched counterattacks that successfully drove the Russians out of northern Druzhba and are now pushing them out of the center of Toretsk. On the northern flank of Toretsk, Russian forces are attempting to seize control of the outskirt town of Druzhba. Control of Druzhba is crucial, as it would provide Russian troops with a staging ground for northern advances to semi-encircle Toretsk. Aware of this, the Ukrainian command is launching counterattacks to challenge the Russian presence and disrupt their plans. Recently, Ukrainian fighters managed to weaken Russian positions in northern Druzhba, with powerful mortar and FPV drone strikes before deploying into the town. While the heavy damage to houses in this area forced Russian fighters to flee, exposing them to the advancing Ukrainians after intense mortar and drone fire on other Russian positions, a small squad of 3 Russian fighters was cornered in a basement. Meanwhile, the remaining Russian troops in the open were eliminated by Ukrainian drone operators. The Ukrainian forces successfully forced the squad in the basement to surrender, taking them as prisoners of war. Ukrainian control of northern Druzhba will prevent the Russian forces from launching flank attacks on Toretsk, while the captured Russian fighters can reveal vital information about the Russian plans, further ruining the plans of the Russian command. In the center of Toretsk, Russian forces entered the high-rise building complex, sparking fierce fighting over the area. Their goal is to capture the high-rises and establish fire control over the surroundings. Achieving this would enable Russian troops to advance along 3rd May Lane, potentially splitting the Ukrainian defenses in half. This move is intended to coordinate with their planned flanking attacks from the north. After Russian forces entered the southern part of the high-rise area, intense fighting broke out with Ukrainian fighters. Once the Russians established positions in one of the buildings, the Ukrainians deployed a remotely operated ground drone packed with explosives to breach a wall, strike Russian positions, and enable their stormtroopers to launch a counterattack. Footage from the Ukrainian Lyut Brigade shows ongoing small arms fire engagements at close range. The fighting escalated as Ukrainians and Russians battled for control of every floor. One Russian soldier attempted to escape by climbing down the balconies, but tragically fell to his death from the 6th floor, a height of 20 meters. The dynamic nature of the fighting in this part of the city prevents the Russians from fully controlling the high-rise area, leaving it contested. Additionally, the Russian failure to establish fire control around the high-rises allowed Ukrainian forces to conduct reconnaissance missions along Central Street, deep behind Russian lines. This forced the Russians to shift focus, attempting to stabilize the situation by expanding control around Central Street and advancing towards Darvina and Pusharenko streets. Their advance was aided by the fact that Ukrainian positions in this area consisted of small residential houses, which Russian stormtroopers initially captured but were quickly halted by Ukrainian fighters. Overall, the Russian plan to quickly advance through Toretsk and split the city into 2 pockets was canceled due to unexpectedly strong Ukrainian resistance in the tactically important high-rise area and the counterattack at Druzhba. As the Russian forces struggled to secure the high-rise buildings, the command had to redirect troops to protect the flanks along Central Street, preventing a potential frontline collapse. Ukrainian counterattacks finally brought the Russian offensive to a halt after months of gradual slowing, and the front has stabilized, shifting the initiative in favor of the Ukrainians. Currently surprise and not an advantage in guns and launchers, was the key to Ukraine's August success on August 6. A powerful Ukrainian mechanized force breached Russian defenses along the Ukraine-Russia border and, moving fast and bypassing Russian trenches, quickly seized 400 square miles of Russia's Kursk Oblast. Why the Ukrainians invaded is complicated. Seizing part of Kursk shifted the momentum of the war, although not decisively, and forced the Kremlin to divert elite forces from the fighting in eastern and southern Ukraine. That chunk of Kursk could be a valuable bargaining chip for Kiev in any future negotiations with Moscow, and how the Ukrainians managed to capture so much Russian soil so quickly is becoming less mysterious. It wasn't necessarily a lack of forces that doomed Russian defenses in Kursk. It was a lack of intelligence and coordination, a map that a Ukrainian soldier captured from a Russian soldier amid the fighting in Kursk helps tell the story. The day before the first Ukrainian troops breached the border, the Russian garrison in Kursk had 18 BM-21 rocket launchers, 98 pieces of tube artillery, and 71 mortars. That's huge, noted Kriegsforscher, a Ukrainian drone operator who saw the captured map. Firepower was on Russian side. That quantity of artillery, properly deployed against Ukrainian troops, as the Ukrainians broke out into the open in Kursk, could have been decisive for the Russians. With a good coordination, you make any breakthrough almost impossible to happen, Kriegsforscher explained. But the artillery wasn't properly deployed, largely due to poor intelligence on part of the Russians and an assumption the Ukrainians would never attack across the border into Kursk. Regrettably, the group of forces protecting the border didn't have its own intelligence assets. Andrei Gurulev, a retired Russian general and a member of the lower house of the Russian parliament, wrote on social media, "So the launchers, guns, and mortars weren't sighted to bombard the likeliest invasion routes, to say nothing of shifting their aim to hit Ukrainian troops as they advanced into territory the Russians never expected to contest, and the Ukrainians moved faster than the ill-prepared Russian artillery could adapt." It didn't help the Russian artillery plan that the Ukrainians were jamming radio communications, filling the air over Kursk with drones, and firing their own artillery, including their best American-made, high-mobility artillery rocket systems. For once in a war mostly characterized by grinding trench battles, in Kursk, the Ukrainians had the advantage of mobility, at least at first. In the opening hours and days of the Kursk offensive, they were able to penetrate deep into Russian territory. Michael Weiss and analyst James Rushton wrote in New Lines magazine in the early days of the August invasion. In many cases, they didn't waste time engaging Russian trench lines and other prepared fighting positions. They just drove around them, Weiss and Rushton wrote. But unimpeded land routes allowed Ukraine to advance miles in mere hours. In those first few days, Russian and Ukrainian troops mixed in an ever-shifting patchwork of small, fluid positions. Good luck bombarding an attacker in those circumstances without also hitting your own defending troops. In short, the Russians had the firepower to defend Kursk, but not the intelligence or coordination. The Ukrainians, to their credit, shrugged off Russia's apparent artillery superiority in Kursk, correctly surmising that befuddled gunners are useless gunners. In the nearly 2 months since Ukrainian forces invaded Kursk, both sides have rushed forces into the oblast. A Russian counterattack has chipped away at the Ukrainian salient, but not by much. The front line has stabilized and both sides are digging in. It's safe to assume Russian artillery in Kursk is now properly sighted and coordinated. If the Ukrainians are going to duplicate their success in Kursk from early August and once again move against poorly prepared artillery, they're going to have to do it somewhere other than Kursk. Meanwhile, 14 newly formed Ukrainian brigades are facing a critical shortage of modern equipment, while deep state analysts report that the situation around Vuhledar has sharply escalated, with Russian forces attempting to encircle the city. According to its analysis, the situation has worsened in recent days due to two key factors: the lack of rotation for the 72nd Brigade and the deployment of territorial defense reserves, which have struggled to hold back the Russian offensive. Recently, Russian forces broke through defenses in the Prechestivka area. As Ukrainian forces retreated to new positions, the Russians were able to outflank the right side of the Vuhledar group. Russian armored units began pushing through the sector near Bohoyavlenka, threatening to cut off logistical routes to Vuhledar, according to Deep State. On Sunday, September 22, Junior Sergeant Stanislav Bunyatov, commander of the 24th Adar Assault Battalion, wrote on Telegram, "The bastards managed to cross the Kashlagak River west of Vuhledar, which means the town will soon be captured."
Basta!